This is my TNA Final Resolution 2009 pay-per-view review. Now, the way most people are going to think about this pay-per-view, it's either going to be, at best, an average pay-per-view from TNA, or it's going to be a very disappointing pay-per-view from TNA. It's really going to be depending on what you thought of the last two matches. Now, the last two matches, I will say, did save this pay-per-view and at least made this pay-per-view an overall average TNA pay-per-view, but the undercard of this pay-per-view, the first 6 matches before you got to the last 2 matches, were just nothing good at all. Like, before I even get into my review, I mean, the first 6 matches, at best, those 6 matches, one match of those 6 matches got 2.5 stars, where 5 of those matches were below 2.5 stars, and I think 2 or 3 got below 2 stars, and that's pretty bad for the undercard. So that's the one thing TNA definitely needs to improve. Like, this pay-per-view showcased like the best and worst in TNA. Like, the first 6 matches showcased the worst of TNA, how TNA can be one of the worst companies. Then the last 2 matches showcased that if TNA did those 2 matches, at least, I'm not expecting 3.5, 4-star matches the whole entire pay-per-view. I'm expecting at least some, other average matches, or at least some other good matches other than the last 2 matches. Like Turning Point last month, mainly the thing that really helped that pay-per-view was just like this pay-per-view, the last 2 matches. But at least at that pay-per-view, you had the Homicide versus Amazing Red X Division opener that was at least 3 stars to 3 1/4 stars, and some people might have liked it even more. Then you had the Kong and Tara cage match, which was at least a 3-star match, and really didn't have anything on that pay-per-view other than probably 1, maybe 2 matches that was terrible. And that overall undercard was weak as well, but it's still a little better than this. So that's the one thing that this pay-per-view kind of showcased. It showcased TNA at its best with its last 2 matches, and at its worst with the first 6 matches. Now, the opening matchup was for the TNA World Tag Team Championships. This was Motors and Machine Guns of Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin versus the British Invasion. And this was a decent match. This was a good way to start it off. When the Motors and Machine Guns, when they were in control of this match, it was very good. Now, even when Doug Williams was kind of in control of this match for the British Invasion, it wasn't that bad. Brutus Magnus, I just dislike him a lot, and that's the one thing that kind of hurts the whole British Invasion tag team is, Doug Williams, he's great in the ring. He's very good. He's kind of not as good as what he was before he got to TNA. He's kind of lost it a little in the ring, but still he's pretty good. But Brutus Magnus kind of holds him back and holds the team back from being probably better or, a very good tag team in TNA. Now, unfortunately, the British Invasion retained the TNA World Tag Team Championships. The Motors and Machine Guns, yet again, in a TNA World Tag Team Championship, and they don't pick up the titles, which is unfortunate because, TNA just doesn't get it. The Motors and Machine Guns, Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley, they're the most over tag team in your company, and you haven't even give this tag team the World Tag Team Championships, not even one time in your organization, which is completely idiotic. Now, TNA's tag division, it needs improvement, but it's still better than WWE's tag division. TNA at least has 3 or 4, solid tag teams, and compared to like the 1 or 2 in WWE. So, but the Motors and Machine Guns could probably improve that tag team division much better if they were, the TNA World Tag Team Champions, which was unfortunate. Now, still, it was a solid match, decent way to start the pay-per-view off with British Invasion pick up the victory after hitting the springboard uppercut powerbomb combination to Chris Sabin to retain the titles in a 2.5-star match. Then the next matchup was Terror versus ODB for the TNA Knockouts Championship. Now, this was a decent women's match at best. Some decent stuff in here. ODB, for one of her matches, it wasn't too bad, but still wasn't that much, to really talk about. Tara does win the TNA Knockouts Championship after a roll-up. TNA's, infamous roll-ups on a pay-per-view, 2 1/4 stars. Then the next matchup was the Feast or Fired match. Now, this gimmick match, I don't think it's as bad as some people say it is, but still, it's not that great of a gimmick match. It's one of those gimmick matches that if it was thrown away and they stopped doing it, I would not care at all, because it's like one of those matches that really, it just completely looks like, especially with the briefcase portion, it looks like you're just trying to rip off your competition. Looks like you're trying to do, the Money in the Bank briefcase thing with TNA with not just one person, but, 4 people. Well, actually 3 people, since one of the briefcase is a fire briefcase. Now, the one thing they did this year when they did the Feast or Fired match, at least in this time, they actually, revealed what was in the briefcases for all 4 wrestlers that got the briefcases on the pay-per-view, and did not make you have to wait till Impact. So that was probably the best thing that happened out of this. At least you didn't have to wait till Impact to see what was in the briefcases. And pretty much the way to, describe the match, it pretty much was just a complete brawl, punch, punch, kick, kick. That's pretty much all you saw in this match. Samoa Joe was very over with the crowd in here, though, so that's pretty good that, he's starting to get back to being very over with the crowd, and hopefully TNA, pushes him very well and starts using him a little better in TNA, because he's got the crowd back on his side, and, TNA, just with their booking, depends how far he can go within the company, not just because of what the fans say, but obviously TNA has the main say. But the one thing you did see, I did enjoy some of the stuff that Jay Lethal and Consequences Creed did in the match. Now, the people that picked up the briefcases were the first person to pick up the briefcase was Sheik Abdul Bashir. He picked up briefcase number 2. Big Rob, he picked up briefcase number 4. Kevin Nash picked up briefcase number 1. And Samoa Joe picked up briefcase number 3. And what was the person that got fired was Sheik Abdul Bashir. So I highly doubt he's actually going to be gone from the company, because I haven't heard anything that he requested his release or anything. So they'll probably do something involving a storyline with Sheik Abdul Bashir's firing from TNA. Big Rob got the X Division Championship shot. So that's kind of the one thing they did last year with Scott Steiner, that he got the X Division Championship last time. So I guess they kind of want to have, a big guy have the X Division Championship, and kind of have, the smaller guy versus bigger guy in the X Division Championship. And hopefully we don't have to see him as X Division Champion. Hopefully they'll just won't do that at all, because that would be terrible if he actually becomes X Division Champion. Kevin Nash, he got the tag team title shot. Now, thinking of Hogan coming to the organization, and there's been somewhat, talks and rumors of Scott Hall coming to TNA. I wouldn't really be shocked if Scott Hall and Kevin Nash teamed up with each other. You saw a little Outsiders reunion, because if he got the tag team title shot, who he's going to team up with? I don't think he'll team up with, someone else in the World Elite or anything like that. I think, he'll, team up with Scott Hall or something like that, because who else will he team up with? And Samoa Joe got the World Heavyweight Championship shot. In that match, I would give probably 1 3/4 stars, just because it was really nothing much of the match at all. Then the next matchup was the elimination match with Team 3D, Rhino and Jesse Neal versus Hernandez, the Pope D'Angelo De Niro, Suicide, and Matt Morgan. And the way this match was the first 5 minutes, because they did a match on Impact, that whoever lost the match on Impact, their team would have to start in handicap fashion 4-on-1. So the first 5 minutes, Hernandez was the only one out there on his team, going up against the others in a 4-on-1. And then before the time expired for the other members to come out there, Hernandez eliminated Rhino. So when they all came out, it was 4-3 in their advantage. Then the eliminations went to, like I said, after that, Hernandez eliminates Rhino. The next elimination was Hernandez gets DQ'd. Now, Jesse Neal, he used a steel chair on and hit Suicide, but didn't get DQ'd. The ref didn't DQ him. But then Hernandez used the chair and knocked out Jesse Neal with the steel chair, and then got DQ'd. And that was pretty much, even though Jesse Neal didn't get pinned in this match, that was pretty much, he got knocked out with the steel chair, and that's the last you saw of him in that match. So even though he didn't get pinned, pretty much that was, Jesse Neal's last thing in the match as well. Then the next elimination was Devon eliminating Suicide. Then Devon eliminated the Pope. Then Morgan eliminates Devon. So then it was Morgan and Brother Ray at the end. And Morgan picks up the victory after hitting the carbon footprint with Brother Ray with the steel chair. And it was at least a watchable match. But it was one of those types of matches that this is something that should have been just, settled on Impact. I don't think it was really worthy of being on the pay-per-view. So 2 stars at best. Then the next matchup this was one match I wasn't really looking forward to at all. This was Raven and Dr. Stevie versus Abyss and Mick Foley. And Mick Foley came out here and said this match is now going to be pretty much no disqualifications. He called it Mick Foley's Funhouse match, which was kind of a playoff of Rhino's match. I think he had some type of gimmick match like that back in the day. Pretty much, anything goes in this match. And this match wasn't much of anything at all. At the end of the match comes when Abyss hits the Black Hole Slam on Raven. So, not Raven, but Abyss and Mick Foley pick up the victory, and I would say at best 1 3/4 stars. Then after this was, actually, there was a match before that. I actually skipped one match. It was Scott Steiner versus Bobby Lashley in a last man standing match. Forgot to talk all about that. Probably just because it wasn't that much of anything at all. Just like, the Raven and Dr. Stevie match versus Abyss and Mick Foley, and just like a couple other matches on this pay-per-view. It was really, one of those matches that wasn't much of anything at all. It just kind of dragged on and on. And after the end of the match comes when Bobby Lashley gets a lead pipe, hits Scott Steiner with it, and then Scott Steiner is laid out for the 10 count, so Bobby Lashley picks up the victory in a 1 3/4 star match. Then, like I said, I already talked about the Raven and Dr. Stevie match versus Mick Foley and Abyss that came after that match. I just accidentally mixed up the ordering of that match. Then came to the two double main events. The first of the double main events was Desmond Wolfe versus Kurt Angle and the 3 Degrees of Pain match. Now, the only problem I had with this was that the steel cage was up the whole entire time. That's the one thing I had a problem with a little bit. It didn't hurt the quality of the match, but it was like one of those things that I think they should have had it, just be, pinfall, without the cage up, and submission without the cage up, and then the cage gets put up and they, go actually in a cage match, because it was like, it was like pinfall in a cage and submission in a cage. That was pretty much like it was. And, they didn't get to use the cage in the first 2 falls because they said, the rules were that even though the cage is up, if they used the cage in the first 2 falls, they would get disqualified. So it was like, what's the point of this cage being up for the first 2 falls? It was just completely pointless. Desmond Wolfe picks up the victory in the first fall after hitting the Tower of London to Angle. Very good starting of the match, good back and forth action. Then the second fall is the submission match. Kurt Angle gets the victory in the second fall after Desmond Wolfe taps out of the ankle lock. And first 2 falls were good back and forth action, a lot of good technical wrestling, a lot of good mat work. Then the third fall was the escape from the cage match, and during this portion of the match, Desmond Wolfe now, got busted open very bad in this match. He was bleeding profusely. During one part, Angle, he was kind of bleeding pretty much a little cut on the back of his head, so he was bleeding a little from the back of his head. And then the end of the match comes when Angle, he was going out the top of the cage. Looks he was about to climb out of the cage. But Desmond Wolfe, keep accidentally, referring to him as Nigel. Desmond Wolfe, I need to get used to calling him that. He gets out. He was trying to go out of the cage as well when Angle was trying to get out, escaping the top of the cage. And Angle gets out first. Then Desmond was pretty much just a second or 2 behind him. So Angle does win the 3 Degrees of Pain match. 3 3/4 star match. It was a very good match. Saw a lot of good stuff in it, but I thought their match at the Turning Point pay-per-view was just a little better, just because this match it was good and a lot of good stuff, but it was like some of the stuff they kind of at the beginning, some of the stuff they probably could have cut out a little bit, and a little bit I think actually not actually cutting stuff out. I think they actually maybe could have been given another 5 minutes or so. I think it was kind of not completely rushed because they did get a good amount of time, but considering 2 out of 3 falls, it might have been, a little rushed and maybe deserved to get a little more time. But still, a lot of great stuff and a lot of good technical wrestling from both these two, like you'd expect. 3 3/4 stars. I myself just enjoyed their match from Turning Point just a little more. Then the main event of the evening was AJ Styles versus Daniels in the TNA for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, and this was a good match like you expect from these two. Very good back and forth action. Now, I expected a little more from this. It disappointed a little bit, but still, it delivered a very good to great main event. I really enjoyed it a lot. And AJ retains the title after hitting hitting the Styles Clash off the middle rope to Daniels to retain the title in a 4-star match. Very good match. Just was expecting a little more from it, but still very good. And overall, this pay-per-view, this is kind of like the hard thing, like with this pay-per-view, is what you would rate it overall. Because the last 2 matches, like I said, 4 stars for the main event, 3 and 3/4 stars for the other match. But everything else on this pay-per-view was like, at best, 2.5 stars, or a couple of them were even less than 2 stars. So it's like one of these pay-per-views that the last 2 matches did save this pay-per-view from being a terrible pay-per-view, but it didn't get them in the territory of being a great pay-per-view. Overall, I give this pay-per-view about a 6.75. Like I said, the last 2 matches were good, but everything else was pretty much passable on this pay-per-view. So if you do check this pay-per-view out, check out the 3 Degrees of Pain match with Desmond Wolfe versus Kurt Angle. That was very good. And the main event with AJ Styles versus Christopher Daniels was very good as well. Daniels and Styles, they always put on great matches against each other, no matter what company they're taking on each other. They always do very good against each other, have very good chemistry. And like I said, this pay-per-view, I would kind of, put this in the category of just an average TNA pay-per-view, just because they really need to work on their undercard. That was the thing that really hurt this pay-per-view, was the first 6 matches of this pay-per-view. Like, if you would at least had maybe one or two other if 1 or 2 of those matches out of the 6 would have been, a very good match, in the category of a 3 to 3.5 star match, that probably would have helped the pay-per-view off a whole lot better. And some of the matches definitely weren't pay-per-view worthy, especially, the Raven and Dr. Stevie versus Mick Foley and Abyss. That was not really pay-per-view worthy in my opinion. The elimination match, something they should have been settled on the Impact. And the other thing on this pay-per-view, didn't even have an X Division Championship match. So overall, I'll give this pay-per-view a 6.75, like I said, and that's it for my TNA Final Resolution 2009 pay-per-view review. Peace. Which is the whole entire pay-per-view. I'm expecting at least some, other average matches, or at least some other good matches other than the last 2 matches. Like Turning Point last month, mainly the thing that really helped that pay-per-view was just like this pay-per-view, the last 2 matches. But at least at that pay-per-view, you had the Homicide versus Amazing Red X Division opener that was at least, 3 stars to 3 1/4 stars, and some people might have liked it even more. And then you had the Kong and Tara cage match, which was, at least a 3-star match, and really didn't have anything on that pay-per-view other than probably 1, maybe 2 matches that was terrible. This is my TNA Final Resolution 2009 pay-per-view review. Now, the way most people are going to think about this pay-per-view, it's either going to be, at best, an average pay-per-view from TNA, or it's going to be a very disappointing pay-per-view from TNA. It's really going to be depending on what you thought of the last 2 matches. Now, the last 2 matches, I will say, did save this pay-per-view and at least made this pay-per-view an overall average TNA pay-per-view. But the undercard of this pay-per-view, the first 6 matches before you got to the last 2 matches, were just nothing good at all. Like, before I even get into my review, I mean, the first 6 matches, at best, those 6 matches, 1 match of those 6 matches got 2.5 stars, where 5 of those matches were below 2.5 stars, and I think 2 or 3 got below 2 stars, and that's pretty bad for the undercard. So that's the one thing TNA definitely needs to improve. Like, this pay-per-view showcased like the best and worst in TNA. Like, the first 6 matches showcased the worst of TNA, how TNA can be one of the worst companies. Then the last 2 matches showcased that if TNA did those 2 matches, at least, I'm not expecting, 3.5, 4-star match. And that overall undercard was weak as well, but it's still a little better than this. So that's the one thing that this pay-per-view kind of showcased. It showcased TNA at its best with its last 2 matches, and at its worst with the first 6 matches. Now, the opening matchup was for the TNA World Tag Team Championships. This was Motor City Machine Guns of Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin versus the British Invasion. And this was a decent match. This was a good way to start it off. When the Motor City Machine Guns, when they were in control of this match, it was very good. Now, even when Doug Williams was kind of in control of this match for the British Invasion, it wasn't that bad. Brutus Magnus, I just dislike him a lot, and that's the one thing that kind of hurts the whole British Invasion tag team is, Doug Williams, he's great in the ring. He's very good. He's kind of not as good as what he was before he got to TNA. He's kind of lost it a little in the ring, but still he's pretty good. But Brutus Magnus kind of holds him back and holds the team back from being probably better or, a very good tag team in TNA. Now, unfortunately, the British Invasion retained the TNA World Tag Team Championships. The Motor Machine Guns yet again in a TNA World Tag Team